So a very warm welcome, everyone. We have today the last session of our Cosmos Seminar series for this academic year. And today it's my pleasure to introduce you Ivan Malara from the University of Milan. So he's a colleague of mine, and he will share with us a very important result that consists in the discovery of notes by Galileo on the Almagest. And so he will talk about Galileo in the margins of the Almagest today. Thank you very much, Ivan, for being here today. I leave it to you.
Thank you, Silvia, for inviting me here today. It's an honor and a pleasure, of course, to be part of this Cosmos Network. And I'd like to begin, first of all, by apologizing in advance, as I will be reading from my notes for the sake of clarity and precision. So just an introduction. My aim today is to present some results of my research on Galileo as a reader of the Almagest, and in particular on the discovery, as you said, of a set of annotations that shed light on Galileo's engagement with this foundational astronomical text. I will proceed in a structured and deliberately non-technical way. First, I will offer a general, necessarily broad and not at all detailed historiographical framework within which my research can be situated. And this is intended simply to provide context and in general to provide, I would say, the interpretative space in which the discovery could and should be placed. I will then briefly recount how I came to come across Galileo's copy of the Almagest and how the identification of it as belonging to Galileo indeed was only gradually established. Rather than presenting this as a single moment of discovery, which obviously it was not, I will emphasize the slow and cumulative process through which the attribution became increasingly secure, as different pieces of evidence began to converge and support one another. At that point, I will show only a small sample of the annotations preserved in the volume, chosen simply to give an initial sense of Galileo's engagement with the text. It is important, however, to clarify from the outset that I do not intend to present this discovery as evidence of a radically new Galileo, nor as a correction that would completely overturn and replace existing scholarly interpretations of his intellectual profile. On the contrary, my argument moves in another direction. Rather than contributing to the construction of yet another new Galileo, I would say, I want to suggest that this material should be understood as a methodological warning. The history of Galileo's reception is, as we know, deeply entangled with interpretative layers, intellectual traditions, and at times simplified or even mythologized representations. For these reasons, there is a constant risk, especially when working on such a heavily studied figure, of reading Galileo's text as if we already knew in advance what he intended to say, what he must have meant. What I would like to stress instead is the importance of resisting this tendency. What emerges from working directly on Galileo's marginalia in the Almagest is less a transformed image of Galileo than a reminder of how easily historical figures can be abscribed into pre-existing narratives. The value of this discovery, therefore, is not to redefine Galileo, but to reinforce a methodological monitum that we should allow the texts, the material traces, and historical facts themselves to speak as independently as possible before integrating them into interpretative frameworks that risk becoming too confident, too smooth, or too predetermined. So now, lately, I have been asked many times to talk about this discovery, and I have enjoyed beginning my presentations with a reference to Owen Gingerich. First, because of my deep admiration for both the man and his work. Second, because my decision to undertake a census of the early printed editions of the Almagest was clearly inspired by his famous census of the first two editions of Copernicus, De Revolutionibus. And this book was published in 2002. And third, because I am particularly fond of quoting two lines from his census, as they capture remarkably well, in my view, the way Galileo was generally perceived until quite recently. As Gingerich writes, Galileo was a famed astronomer and physicist, but a scientist with little interest in technical mathematical astronomy. Now, when he wrote these lines, his assessment was more than reasonable. Indeed, neither Galileo's published writings nor those that remained unpublished contain evidence of a sustained interest in the more technical and mathematical aspects of astronomy, whether Ptolemaic or Copernican. Admittedly, the third day of the dialogue concerning the two chief world systems includes some relatively technical discussions, but not enough to alter our understanding of the kind of scholar Galileo was thought to be, namely someone primarily concerned with broader cosmological questions and with the mathematical subtleties of the competing systems. And these two systems, the Copernican and the Ptolemaic, were not merely rival, but they were the only two fully developed systems, complete with planetary theories, that, according to Galileo, could generally compete with one another. So Tycho's system was formally left out by Galileo. As far as I'm aware, in any case, there are relatively few substantial studies devoted specifically to Galileo's astronomical knowledge. One notable example is Guglielmo Righinis' essay, published in 1978 in the second issue of the Annals of the Institute and Museum of the History of Science. It is a stimulating essay from several perspectives, I think. But the dominant impression it leaves, at least for me, is that Galileo's serious interest in astronomy began only after he used the telescope. And the same impression emerges from the work of other Galileo scholars. For instance, in his introduction to the important volume on the diffusion of Copernicanism in Italy, Maurizio Torrini argued that Galileo's adherence to Copernicus' doctrine should be traced back to years, and I quote, far removed from his astronomical concerns, end of quote. According to this interpretation, Galileo was attracted above all by the possibility of explaining many natural phenomena, and thus came to recognize in Copernicus a philosopher, and in his doctrine, I quote, a revolutionary conception of the all, end of quote. The thesis that Galileo became a Copernican primarily for philosophical reasons was later developed, and in my view, perhaps with excessive emphasis, by Massimo Bucentini and Anna De Pace. This is, of course, only one among many historiographical interpretations. There is probably no need today to revisit in detail Mario Biagioli's well-known argument that the intellectual motives underlying Galileo's work and ideas were less important than the ambitions of a courtier who, like many of his contemporaries, sought a distinctive path to attention, fame, and above all, patronage. And I would further suggest that this opportunistic interpretation by Biagioli, which extends even to Galileo's conversion to Copernicanism, shares some certain affinities with the account proposed by Paul Feyerabend in Against Method, where ideological motives are presented as the principal force behind Galileo's embrace of Copernicanism. There are also scholars, most notably Stillman Drake, who strongly emphasize the absence of a philosophical dimension in Galileo's work. According to Drake, Galileo's revolution consisted primarily in a new way of practicing science. For this reason, he maintained that Galileo's method rested on no philosophical or metaphysical foundations, but was purely operational. In a fascinating essay, closer to philosophy of science than to history of science, Drake even identified the thinker who most influenced Galileo's methodological transformation. There is Claudius Ptolemy, an astronomer rather than a philosopher, according to Stillman Drake. Now, just as Ptolemy's astronomy, according to Drake, was unconcerned with the causes of motion and focused solely on constructing mathematical models consistent with observations, so, continued Stillman Drake, Galileo's natural philosophy supposedly sought mathematical description rather than causal explanation. Now, in reality, Drake's thesis is difficult to sustain for several reasons. To begin with, who ever claimed that Ptolemy did not regard himself or was not regarded by others as a philosopher? I mean, more recent scholarship, including the work of Liba Taub, of Alan Bowen, and Jacqueline Fick, has recovered a picture of Ptolemy that is considerably more philosophical than is often assumed. Moreover, Ptolemy emerges as an eclectic thinker, drawing on a variety of philosophical doctrines and traditions and intellectual traditions. How then was Ptolemy viewed in Galileo's own time? The image of Ptolemy as a moral philosopher certainly circulated widely throughout the Latin West, and which had profoundly shaped by the Arabic reception of both Ptolemaic and pseudo-Ptolemaic writings. Furthermore, in the preface to George of Trebizond's Latin translation from the Greek, his son, Andrew, states that Ptolemy had been educated through the study of Aristotle's work. And Luca Gaurico, in a note appended to book 11 of the Almagest, remarks that Ptolemy philosophizes, and I quote. And even Galileo, and I'm sorry, this citation is in Italian, in the dedication to Ferdinand II that precedes the dialogue, employs this language in describing both Ptolemy and Copernicus as among the greatest philosophers who ever lived and among those who most profoundly influenced Galileo himself. In any case, my purpose is not to dismantle Drake's thesis or any other. The real issue, it seems to me, lies elsewhere. Historians have often assumed that in order to understand Galileo's work and some of his most consequential choices, such as his adherence to Copernicanism, it is first necessary to determine who Galileo fundamentally was. Was he a philosopher, a courtier, a scientist, or more precisely, a scientist with little interest in technical mathematical astronomy? Even today, many studies of Galileo proceed from assumptions of this kind in order to construct an overreaching interpretation of his work and actions, even where the available evidence should perhaps oblige us to remain in contact with more tentative conclusions. However, there is evidence. There are enough pieces of evidence, I believe, to start with. And Antonio Favaro, and again, I'm sorry, I haven't had the time to translate this passage. Favaro, who is the editor of the national edition of Galileo's work, he was a mathematician and a very important scholar, a historian, especially for Galileo studies. He may have been overly optimistic when he expressed confidence that Galileo's surviving writings, if carefully analyzed, would reveal the reason why Galileo ultimately became a Copernican. Nevertheless, my own research began precisely with a close examination of certain statements made by Galileo himself. This convinced me that it was worth advancing a hypothesis, namely, as I write in the opening sentence of my very humble book, that, I quote myself, Galileo's Copernican beliefs were grounded in Ptolemy's Almagest, end of quote. Now, this statement, however, is just a point of departure. It's a point of departure rather than a conclusion. It is a hypothesis grounded in several remarks made by Galileo himself. For example, in the dialogue, we read that, and I quote, "There is no one who follows Copernicus' opinion who has not first held the contrary one, and who is not thoroughly informed of the arguments of Aristotle and Ptolemy," end of quote. Or in the marginal notes to Grassis Libra, Galileo says that, I quote, "We have learned from Ptolemy, not from little pedants," end of quote. And here the reference is to Sacrobosco's Sfera. And again, in the Essayer, he says, and I quote, that he did not learn astronomy from teachers of elementary astronomy, but from Ptolemy. Now, also we should, I think most importantly, we should consider what Benedetto Castelli wrote in 1615 against an Aristotelian, Ludovico delle Colombe, and he wrote this under Galileo's direct guidance. And he wrote, this is a long quote, but it's very interesting, I think, and my whole research started from this quote, and the main question of my research was why did Galileo become a Copernican? And I started from this quote, and then my research developed from that. Now, if you wish to receive, you, Ludovico delle Colombe, wish to receive good advice, desiring as you do to understand Copernicus in order to refute him, first devote yourself to the study of Euclid's Elements, beginning with the definition of a point. Then strive to understand the sphere of Sacrobosco and the Theoricae Planetarum, I think the Nove Theoricae Planetarum by Feuerbach. And having understood these, proceed to Ptolemy's Almagest and study it diligently until you have thoroughly mastered it. Once you have acquired this knowledge, apply yourself to Copernicus' De Revolutionibus, and if you succeed in acquiring this science, you will first come to realize that mathematical knowledge is no child's play, as you judge it now according to the small portion you possess. Rather, when measured against what Ptolemy and Copernicus knew, and what you too will then understand, you will find it to be a study fit for men of 100 years. And what will astonish you most is that you will change your opinion of Copernicus and become convinced that it is impossible to understand him without agreeing with his doctrine. Now, taken together, this passage reveals a different Galileo, I think, one who has received comparatively little attention until now, namely a careful student of the Almagest, who, having mastered this work and the mathematical techniques employed by Ptolemy, was able to read Copernicus successfully and conclude that his doctrine was both superior and worthy of acceptance. In my short book, I have considered Galileo's early writings on motion, in which the Almagest is cited several times, and where Galileo himself claims to have completed a commentary on the work on the Almagest that was ready for publication. The result of this initial investigation was the conclusion that Galileo had indeed engaged directly with the first book of the Almagest, especially its cosmological and philosophical sections. What I could not yet demonstrate was that he had studied the more mathematical portions of the treatise. And I acknowledge this limitation openly by the end of the book. Nevertheless, the broader research program appeared promising, not only for Galileo's studies. It seems, and it still seems, worthwhile to investigate the reception of the early printed editions of the Almagest, since the marginal annotations they contain can reveal a great deal about how the work circulated and was read throughout Europe in a period when the revolutionibus also first saw the light of day. This conviction led me to begin a targeted census of surviving copies. My first destination was Vienna for several reasons, where I examined a heavily annotated copy that proved interesting in many respects. Encouraged by this discovery, I decided to continue my research in Florence's three principal libraries, the Biblioteca Medicea Laurenziana, the Biblioteca Riccardiana, and of course, the Biblioteca Nazionale Centrale of Florence. And there, my research took an unexpected turn. Of the 7 volumes I had requested to consult, I was initially given 2. The second one struck me immediately upon opening it. On the front flyleaf, there was, in fact, the full transcription of a psalm. You can see it here. Exaltabo te Deus meus rex, and so on. This is not in itself unusual. What caught my attention was not the psalm itself, but the handwriting. Having worked extensively on Galileo's early manuscripts, I noticed certain similarities with his fair copy hand in parts of manuscripts 46 and 71 of the Galilean corpus. At first, these remained only an impression, and I immediately convinced myself that it could not be Galileo. Nevertheless, I could not help but turn at once to chapter 3 of the first book of the Almagest. Why? Well, there one finds a passage that Galileo interprets in a very peculiar way in his early writings on motion, precisely in the section where he states that he completed his commentary on the Almagest, which is this one. And without entering into detail, it is sufficient to recall that Galileo criticizes the traditional hypothesis, also endorsed by Ptolemy in that chapter of the Almagest, according to which the apparent enlargement of celestial bodies near the horizon, today we call it moon illusion, is caused by a layer of vapors and exhalations, denser than air, interposed between the observer and the observed object in the sky. For Galileo, this explanation is untenable, not least because he is convinced that experience does not support it. And I think you can read it ad experientiam and so on. So he's saying this. The same appeal to experience as a critical instrument is found in a marginal note to chapter 3 of the first book of that very same Almagest, where the psalm is transcribed in a hand strikingly similar to Galileo's. Hoc quod supponit Ptolomeus, it's written here, falsum esse experientia docet, quod licet verum esse tamen, etc., etc. Now, at that point, when I realized this, I began to grow seriously suspicious. And that night, as you can imagine, I did not sleep. I continued working both by comparing the handwriting of the marginal notes with Galileo's. And here you can see on the left side words from the Almagest annotated by Galileo. And on the right side, you can see words taken from manuscript 71 and sometimes 46 of Galileo's writings. So they are mainly from Galileo's De Motu Antiquaria, so his early writings on motions. As you can see, like for instance, the first word, it's written omnibus and horizontem. You can see that horizontem is written without H, and that's typical for Galileo in that period. Sursum, settamen, centrum, verum, and then here you can see leviores aggravioribus expellentur et sursum attollentur. And you can see that here in the Motu Antiquaria, Galileo uses the same terminology, attolleretur, atque expelleretur, and the ductus, the style of the handwriting is very, very similar. It's, I think, identical. And so in that night, I worked both by comparing, I continued working both by comparing the handwriting of the marginal notes with Galileo's and by analyzing the content of other annotations, which I had meanwhile photographed. Gradually, also thanks to the assistance of other Galileo scholars, I came to the conclusion that these annotations were indeed written by Galileo himself. Now, since it is not every day that one discovers a previously unknown Galilean manuscript, I wanted to reach a sufficient degree of certainty to support the attribution. And the evidence I have identified so far is presented in the article recently published in the Journal for the History of Astronomy. And fittingly, the editors of the journal, James Evans and Richard Kremer, submitted the paper to the judgment of not two, not three, but four referees. And I'm pleased to be able to say that my arguments were ultimately found convincing and that the attribution to Galileo is now difficult to dispute. But having secured this first result, what remains is the more demanding, but also in my view, the more fascinating task of transcribing all the annotations, which are around 100 in total, and understanding also through comparison with other copies of the Almagest, how Galileo read this foundational work of Ptolemy. Some interesting results have already emerged. The annotation suggests that Galileo's primary aim was to clarify Ptolemy's arguments and more specifically, his mathematical demonstration and astronomical tables. In one case, for example, Galileo comments on the table of chords in Book 1. In another, whose full transcription is included in the article, this one, he discusses the table of lunar anomalies in Book 5. And this part, I have transcribed this part in the article published in the Journal for the History of Astronomy. And in other instances, Galileo appears to attempt to streamline Ptolemy's mathematical procedures, although it is not always clear whether he succeeds. In one case, for example, he claims that the value of chord, I'm sorry, I don't want to bore you, but just to show you an example. It's a bit technical, but it's easy. Here, Galileo claims that the value of chord AG can be derived from AB and BG without constructing the cyclic quadrilateral BGDE, that is, without using what is known as Ptolemy's theorem, which is the theorem that indeed Ptolemy uses in this case. However, it is not at all evident, in my view, how this is to be done. It's very difficult to understand it. And it is worth, in any case, noting that something similar appears in a 1585 work by Clavius, which makes it worthwhile to consider possible sources for these annotations as well. And this is very interesting. But another interesting thing, in my view, is to compare, as I said earlier, this annotation by Galileo with other annotations on different copies of the Almagest. For instance, the one that I found in Vienna, which is this one. This one these are annotations on a copy which was published in 1515 in Venice, and which bears the Latin translation of Gerard of Cremona. So this is a Latin translation from Arabic, and here is the same passage of the Almagest that Galileo here annotated, but we can find here a different way of reading, at least, or maybe studying the Almagest. In this case, we have the annotator whom I wasn't able to identify. He transcribed Propositio Sexta, the sixth proposition that we can find in Regiomontanus' Epitome of the Almagest, which was a very influential book at the time. So he copies this proposition, and then he adds an operatio. And I wasn't able to understand the sources in this case of this operation. I think this is something peculiar, originally written by the annotator, but I'm not sure. And in any case, you can see that here the annotator is doing something very different from Galileo's annotations, because here you have a kind of algorithm. The annotator is translating Ptolemy's demonstration in a kind of arithmetical rule. which is very easy to translate into modern notation. Here is my transcription. Sumantur per secundam propositionem bine cordere. It means if you translate this in mathematical notation, the one we use today, you have this operation, which is very clear. And at the same time, it's different than the thing that Galileo does in his copy of the Almagest. We have very different practices, I believe. And right now, I would like to have the time, indeed, to work on this, to prepare a census of different copies of the Almagest, and because I think it's interesting, it would be interesting to compare these different annotations so as to understand the different mathematical practices that many people, many mathematicians and astronomer or simply student used at the time to learn and to understand or simply read Ptolemy's Almagest. Anyway, for the time being, in any case, it is too early to claim that this discovery confirms my initial hypothesis, namely that a deep engagement with the Almagest was decisive for Galileo's Copernican conversion. It is, however, highly probable that the annotations predate or only slightly precede the early manuscripts on motion, the De Motu Antiquara, written most likely between 1589 and 1592 by Galileo. And this is therefore an extremely significant body of evidence. I mean, this copy of the Almagest annotated by Galileo is very significant, not least because very little survives today from Galileo's early period. And what does survive, moreover, deserves far closer attention, but this is a separate issue. And I would like to conclude, I hope I didn't talk too much. I would like to conclude on a simple, but in my view, necessary note. Much work remains to be done to understand what kind of Galileo emerges from the margins of his Almagest. There was certainly a period in Galileo's life when technical mathematical astronomy occupied him intensely, and the annotations in his Almagest provide direct evidence of that engagement. At the same time, its significance should not be overstated. And I would never have enough of saying that caution is still very much essential at this stage. My hope is that this discovery will instead encourage a renewed reading of Galileo in its full complexity, resisting interpretative frameworks that are sometimes accepted too uncritically. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ivan, for this wonderful talk. I personally learned a lot from, I mean, it was also interesting to see exactly how you tackled the question of, identifying the author of these notes. And now I will open the discussion with the rest of the participants. So please raise your hands if you want to take part or ask questions during the discussion. Are there questions, remarks? Pavel, yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, thanks very much, Ivan, and congratulations for the discovery. This must have been a very long, but in very much rewarding night that you spent figuring out how to go about proving that it is Galileo, and whatever you did next seemed to point out in the direction that it was Galileo. So it must have been very exciting. Tell me, so you have studied these 100 or so annotations, and what is their nature? Is it mostly explicational, or is it more like the questioning or critical? What kind of?
Yeah, it's not very critical. I mean, sometimes he says Ptolemy here, his demonstration is unclear, and so maybe he should have said this and sometimes it tries to, as I showed earlier, to simplify the same demonstration or conclusions by Ptolemy, and but it's not really critical. Not. It's like these notes. I mean, I transcribed the notes in the first book and partially the ones in the second one, but I still working on them. And but I read them already, and I can say that they're not critical at all. And you can't see there that there is a Galileo, an already Copernican Galileo, or Galileo who there is no sign of Galileo being interested in Copernicus, not at all. They are very technical. It's like, as I said, the Motu Antiquarii, he says that he wrote a commentary on the Almagest that was ready for publication. And I think that these notes were just a kind of preparatory work for that kind of commentary that never came out. And they show that he studied the very technical parts of Ptolemy's Almagest, not just the first book. I mean, in the first book, there are technical parts as well because it's about trigonometry, but it's mainly about cosmological and philosophical questions that are explained by Ptolemy. But as I said in my book, I only found some pieces of evidence that he read directly this first part of the Almagest. And then finally I could find this book, this annotated copy of the Almagest. And from that, we can truly say now that he engaged with the technical parts. And most of these notes are about technical explanation of technical parts of the Almagest. So the notes, and mainly at the end of the fifth book, which is about the moon, and the Theorica of the moon was one of the most difficult, and it was the masterpiece of Ptolemy, I would say, the most important thing that he did in the Almagest, among many others. And it's very, very technical, very difficult. And Galileo somehow read it and was able to read it. And you have to consider that at the time, a few mathematicians were able to read the Almagest, because it wasn't enough to know Euclid's elements. You need to indeed know linear and plane, and spherical.
Yeah.
So it was very difficult.
Yeah. So you think that the purpose of the annotations was a kind of preparatory work for what was supposed to be a planned commentary on the Almagest?
Yeah, I think so. That's my opinion. But I mean, my idea now, I just want to transcribe, to make a transcription and an edition of these notes, and then let other scholars read them. And maybe there are other opinions, other ideas. I mean, I'm open to that, because I don't want to be the only one who studies this note. Confrontation. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, Valeria.
Yes, hello. So thank you, Ivan, and congratulations for this discovery, and thank you, Sylvia, for the opportunity to learn about this discovery. So, Ivan, the question is this. So there are other historians and they have not found this, okay? And they can say, oh, he was just lucky and we were not, okay? So how would you reply them in the following kind of perspective? Of course, I'm more a philosopher, the value of a philosopher is to create new arguments, okay? But the value of a historian is to analyze the things which are already there. So one way a historian can be a good historian is that there is something already existing and you provide a good commentary. But another kind of good historian is someone who has discovered something decisive. And I was making a talk here some months ago, and I was telling about Collier and Stachel, who also discovered an archival document which was very important for general relativity and so on and so forth. Okay, so this is another way to be a good historian. If it's right, then this is not just luck. Okay, so there must be some strategy which you followed, which others have not followed, and which maybe is making you a good historian. So could you explain more on what are the criteria? And so, yeah, so how would you explain this is not just luck? Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm not sure if I'm a good historian. I hope so, but I mean, for sure, this was not just a matter of being lucky, because I mean, I wrote a book which was published at the end of 2024 about Galileo and the Almagest, and in that book, I explained that there were enough pieces of evidence to continue this research on Galileo and the Almagest, a research that almost no one had ever started. I mean, there were when I started my research on Galileo and the Almagest, some of my colleagues and professors that follow my research, they told me, well, this is really a difficult topic because there is not enough material to work on. There are no documents, no sources. Are you sure you want to do something like that? And not only, I mean, there are no sources, okay, but there is even no bibliography on that. There are no studies on Galileo and the Almagest, almost no studies. So it was very difficult, and it was a kind of bet that I made, but I didn't do it because I wanted to do it. As I showed earlier, I did it because I read some passages written by Galileo and by, for instance, Castelli, who was his student and friend as well, where Galileo says, in order to understand Copernicus, you have to read Ptolemy's Almagest. And then there were other passages where Galileo said, I understand Almagest very well. So I didn't quote, for instance, his replies to Scheiner, Christoph Scheiner, which was a Jesuit. And in this context, Galileo says that he read the Almagest and he knew the Almagest better than Scheiner, which was an astronomer, a Jesuit astronomer. And because of this, I started my research. And then after I published my book, I went to the library in Florence and I happened to find this book. The only thing I think that it's about being lucky is that no one else before me found that book, which was, I mean, hidden in plain sight, because I didn't do anything special. I just asked the librarian to show me all the copies of the Almagest, and then I found this one. But the real problem is that no one before me, I think, as far as I know, was ever being interested in Galileo and the Almagest. Because when you think of Galileo, you think of a thinker who is mainly a Copernican, you know, and who cares about Galileo and the Almagest? But if you read some passages, then you say, okay, he was a Copernican, not only for philosophical reasons. Maybe he was a Copernican also because he read the Almagest and then equipped with some technical expertise that he acquired by reading the Almagest. He also read the De Revolutionibus, and he understood that Copernicus was a very good astronomer indeed. So I think, I'm not sure I replied, but I think this was not just a matter of luckiness.
Yeah, so you asked the right question. What should I seek for? Okay, thank you and good luck with continuing the studies.
Thank you.
There is Stefano, but I don't know whether I can add something. I mean, it's a personal experience, because what you said reminded me of something that happened to me at some point, because I found this. It's about Kant and Herschel again. So basically, there was this report in the Jahrbuch of Bode at the beginning of the 90s in the 18th century. And Bode, there was a revival, let's say, of a nationalistic trend in Prussia. And of course, there was the menace of Napoleon in France and so on. So basically, Bode tended, as other people, to consider Herschel, even if he went to England, a German product, so something that pertained to the continent. And he put together the figures of Kant and Herschel and so on and so forth. And I thought, okay, we have evidence of the fact that Kant read Herschel, but what about Herschel? And I talked to tons of experts. I mean, one of them also passed away. So, I mean, he said, no, it's impossible. Herschel never read Kant's works. There's no point in finding this influence and so on. And then in the end, I found the manuscript that was stored in Texas, and nobody thought about it, so about looking in the notes, in the manuscripts of the 90s. So I also think, just to add to Valeria's question, that there is also, I mean, it's very important to challenge the biases, because there is this view of Galileo as, I mean, and it's true, of course, as somebody very much engaged with politics. And I mean, we tend to read it, to read the whole story from that angle, and we consider all the affair and how he had to handle, the accusation from the church, blah blah blah. But still, of course, it cannot be the whole story. They're used to that, and I think that your work and your discovery is so important, because it challenges something that we believe is known, right? Just like we believed, okay, the fact that, Herschel never read Kant, never cared about Kant, or Galileo never cared about the Almagest in such detail. It's not the case.
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
Sorry, but it was very nice. Stefano, go ahead.
No, thanks, Silvia, because it is a very interesting story. So I totally agree with you. We have to challenge the biases, because otherwise, as Ivan said, the book was hidden in plain sight, and it was a wonderful way of resuming this discovery. So it was there, waiting for someone interesting in reading it. And so, and as far as you said that. According to you, these notes are a sort of preparatory work, and we have the Treaty of the Sphere as the only work written, and the only extant work on the Almagest, based on Galileo's lessons in Padua. Did you find some questions in common between the two, or?
No, thank you, Stefano, for the question. It's very interesting. No, I didn't find it. And as you know, I mean, the treatise on the sphere is something meant for students. And it's true, it's based on Ptolemy's Almagest, but it's mainly based on Sacro Bosco's sphere. So it's like an introductory work, very easy to understand, where there is no mathematics at all. In this case, Galileo's notes deal with the mathematics of the Almagest.
Okay, the most technical parts. So
Yeah.
the most technical aspects. So.
Yeah.
I have a question, more technical one, with regard to your presentation. So you said before that there are specific parts in which Galileo complains about the fact that it's not clear what's written in the Almagest and so on. So do you have, or can you give us a more detailed account about one or two, a couple of these parts? Because probably they attracted more his attention for some reason. So
yeah, I mean, there is one passage in book 4 or maybe book 3, chapter 4. Now I don't remember very well, but it's about the fact that it's equal to use epicycles and I mean large epicycles and little one, but moved from the center, eccentric. You know, so this passage, he says, is not clear, is unclear in Ptolemy's words, and he then tries to rephrase Ptolemy's procedure, no, but the logics that is behind Ptolemy statement. So this is the passage. But now, you know, I worked on that 2 or 3 months ago, so I should look at it again, and then I can send it to you. But it was interesting because it was one of those passages that were highlighted by Swerdlow, you know, in his work on the derivation of the first draft and so on, where he says he tries to understand why Copernicus developed heliocentrism, and he said that he did it probably because he read not only the Almagest, but also the epitome of the Almagest by Regiomontanus. And there are some chapters very nice, because very important passages, because in those passages, Ptolemy and Regiomontanus say that there are some equivalent models that you can use to explain, to save the same phenomena. And so also because I was suggested to do that by Richard Kremer, I then looked at Galileo's copy, and then I found that in one of these passages he made a full comment about the fact, indeed, that Ptolemy's statement was not very clear. He wanted to say something in a certain way, but he does it in another way. And now I know that I'm very, I can't enter in the detail right now, but if you want later, I can send you the passage that I have already transcribed. And but in any case, this is also interesting if you compare his way of reading the Almagest with other annotators' ways of reading the Almagest. Because, for instance, in the copy that I found in Vienna, you can see that the annotator was interesting not only in the mathematics, but especially in like he had a philological interest. Like he compared Gerard of Cremonen's translation from Arabic with George of Trebizond's translation from Greek, and then he wrote some Greek words. So there was this kind of philological attention that you cannot find at all in this copy, and this is consistent with what we know about Galileo, of course.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'll be interested definitely. So if you can just, you know,
if I can, I don't know if we have enough time, I can share the screen and I can show you the passage.
I don't know whether there are other questions first.
Okay.
Are there other questions for our speaker? No, they all want to see the screen, but maybe we stop the registration, I mean the recording.
Yes, it would be better, yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much again, Ivan, for your talk and for the discussion. And we stop here our seminar for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.